The morning air carried the crisp promise of a bustling day as Daniel Harris strode briskly down the crowded city sidewalk, adjusting the fine cashmere scarf around his neck. A successful entrepreneur at the helm of a thriving tech company, Daniel's life was a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and high-stakes decisions. Today was no exception. A critical investor meeting loomed less than an hour away, and his mind was already 3 steps ahead, rehearsing key talking points as his polished leather shoes clicked against the pavement. A gentle wind tugged at his tailored coat, but Daniel didn't notice when the breeze whisked his wallet from his jacket pocket. It fell silently to the ground, lost among the rush of hurried footsteps. A few blocks away, Peter sat hunched on the corner of 5th and Main, his tattered blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The cool air bit at his weathered face, but Peter barely felt it. After years of living on the streets, he had grown accustomed to the cold, though it never stopped him from dreaming of warmth. Once a skilled carpenter with a family and a modest home, Peter had seen his life unravel after a string of tragedies: a sudden recession, the loss of his wife to illness, and debts that spiraled beyond his control. Now, his days were spent battling hunger, loneliness, and the gnawing ache of regret. Yet, through it all, Peter held tightly to a core belief instilled in him by his late mother: do good, no matter how hard it is. The world needs it. It was this conviction that made him notice the brown leather wallet lying abandoned on the pavement, just a few feet away from where he sat. He reached for it cautiously, careful not to draw the attention of the crowd. Peter opened the wallet and was greeted by a neat row of credit cards, a thick stack of cash, and a driver's license with the name Daniel Harris. The address listed was in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. For a moment, Peter's stomach tightened with hunger as he eyed the cash. It was more money than he had seen in months and could buy him warm meals, clean clothes, maybe even a night at a motel. But the thought faded as quickly as it came. Peter's hands trembled as he clutched the wallet. "It's not mine," he whispered to himself. His mother's voice echoed in his mind: integrity doesn't cost a thing, but it's worth everything. With a deep breath, he decided he would find a way to return it. Peter approached a nearby coffee cart, his shoes scuffing the ground as he walked. The vendor, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, glanced up with a polite smile. "Good morning," she said. Peter hesitated. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could I use your phone? I found this wallet and need to contact the owner." The woman eyed him warily at first, taking in his ragged appearance, but there was something earnest in Peter's voice. She handed him her phone with a nod. "Here, just be quick with it." "Thank you," Peter said sincerely as he fumbled to dial the number on the business card tucked inside the wallet. The phone rang twice before a voice answered briskly. "This is Daniel Harris." "Mr. Harris," Peter began, his voice unsteady but resolved. "I found your wallet. I'd like to return it to you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You found my wallet?" Daniel repeated, surprise evident in his tone. "Yes, sir," Peter replied. "I'm at the corner of 5th and Main. I can wait here until you arrive." "I'll be there in 20 minutes," Daniel said after a moment, his voice softening. "Thank you for calling." As Peter handed the phone back to the coffee vendor, she surprised him by offering a steaming cup of coffee. "Here. On the house," she said with a warm smile. Peter accepted it gratefully, the warmth of the cup seeping into his chilled hands. He sat back down and waited, watching the world bustle past him, wondering what kind of man Daniel Harris would be. True to his word, Daniel arrived in less than 20 minutes. His black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb, and he stepped out, a striking figure in a tailored coat and leather gloves. He spotted Peter almost immediately and approached him, his brow furrowed. "You're the one who called?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Peter nodded and held out the wallet. "This belongs to you." Daniel took it, his eyes scanning the contents. Everything was there: the cash, the cards, even the receipts. He looked back at Peter, his expression unreadable. You could have taken the money, Daniel said slowly. Why didn't you? Peter shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't mine to take. For a moment, Daniel said nothing, his mind racing. In his world of cutthroat deals and relentless ambition, such selflessness was a rarity. He studied Peter, taking in the worn clothes and weary eyes, and felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: admiration. What's your name? Daniel asked. Peter, he replied simply. Peter, is there anything I can do to thank you? Daniel asked, an idea forming in his mind. Are you looking for work? Peter hesitated. I've been looking, but it's hard without a place to stay or decent clothes, he admitted, his voice tinged with the weariness of experience. Daniel nodded thoughtfully, then gestured toward his car. Let me take you to lunch. We'll talk more there. Peter blinked, surprised. Lunch? Yes, Daniel said, smiling for the first time. I insist. As they walked toward the car, Peter felt a strange sensation stirring within him, a faint, fragile glimmer of hope. The cafe Daniel chose was a warm and inviting corner bistro, its large windows offering a view of the bustling street outside. The scent of freshly baked bread and brewed coffee greeted Peter as he stepped inside, making his stomach ache with hunger. For a moment he hesitated, feeling out of place among the polished tables and neatly dressed patrons. Daniel noticed his hesitation and offered a reassuring nod. You're my guest, Daniel said. Come on. They were seated at a quiet booth near the window, and a friendly waitress handed them menus. Peter stared at his, overwhelmed by the options. It had been years since he'd ordered a proper meal. Get whatever you like, Daniel encouraged, sensing his uncertainty. Thank you, Peter murmured, settling on a bowl of hearty soup and a turkey sandwich. When their meals arrived, Peter ate slowly, savoring every bite. Daniel, meanwhile, studied him thoughtfully. He found himself curious about this man who had chosen honesty over desperation. So Daniel began, leaning back in his chair. Tell me about yourself. How did you end up in this situation? Peter hesitated, his spoon pausing mid-air. He wasn't used to anyone asking about his life, let alone listening. But there was something about Daniel's tone genuine and free of judgment that encouraged him to speak. I used to be a carpenter, Peter said, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. Had my own small business, a family, a home. Things were good for a long time. But then work dried up during the recession. My wife fell ill and medical bills piled up. I couldn't keep up, and we lost everything. After she passed, he trailed off, swallowing hard. I couldn't hold it together. I've been on the streets for a few years now. Daniel listened in silence, his expression softening. The story struck a chord deep within him. For all his success, he had never faced the kind of trials Peter described. But he could imagine how easily life could spiral out of control when hit by one tragedy after another. That sounds like more than anyone should have to bear, Daniel said finally. But you've shown remarkable character. Not many people would do what you did today. Peter shrugged. I just did what was right. My mother always said, your character is the one thing no one can take from you. Daniel smiled faintly. She sounds like a wise woman. As they finished their meal, Daniel set down his napkin and leaned forward. Peter, I want to help you, he said. Peter looked up, startled. Help me. I run a company, Daniel explained. We're always looking for reliable, hard-working people. It might not be carpentry, but I can train you. And as far as housing goes, I have a guest house on my property. It's been sitting empty for months. You're welcome to stay there while you get back on your feet. Peter blinked, the weight of Daniel's words sinking in. You'd do that for me. Why not? Daniel said, smiling. You've already proven you're someone I can trust. Everyone deserves a second chance. Peter felt his throat tighten with emotion. I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. Then don't thank me yet, Daniel replied. Let's take this one step at a time. Tomorrow, I'll take you to the office and introduce you to the team. We'll figure out the rest as we go. By the time they left the cafe, Peter felt like he was walking on air. Daniel called his driver, and they made their way to Daniel's home. As the car pulled into the gated driveway, Peter's jaw dropped. The estate was stunning, with a modern main house surrounded by manicured gardens. The guest house stood a short distance away, a cozy, well-maintained structure with a wide porch and large windows. "This is it," Daniel said as they stepped out of the car. He led Peter to the guest house and unlocked the door, revealing a fully furnished living space. The kitchen was stocked with basic groceries, and the bedroom held a neatly made bed with crisp linens. "Make yourself at home," Daniel said. "We'll take care of clothes and anything else you need tomorrow." Peter sank onto the plush sofa, running his fingers over the fabric. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of survival lift, replaced by a flicker of hope. Daniel glanced at his watch. "I'll leave you to get settled. See you in the morning." As the door closed behind him, Peter sat in silence, staring at his new surroundings. Tears welled up in his eyes as he whispered to himself, "Maybe life isn't done with me yet." That night, for the first time in years, Peter slept soundly, wrapped in warmth and possibility. The next morning, Peter awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the guesthouse curtains. For a moment he lay still, unsure if the events of the previous day had been a dream. But the cozy warmth of the bed and the faint hum of life outside reminded him that it was all real. He rose quickly, showering and dressing in the clothes Daniel had left for him the night before. A knock at the door startled him. When he opened it, Daniel stood there holding a bag. "Morning," Daniel said. "I picked up a few more things for you, clothes, toiletries, that kind of stuff." Peter took the bag with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," Daniel replied with a smile. "Just focus on what comes next." Ready to head to the office. The ride to the company's headquarters felt surreal for Peter. The building was a towering structure of steel and glass, its sleek design standing in stark contrast to the rough city streets Peter had grown accustomed to. Inside, the lobby was a bustling hub of activity. People moved with purpose, exchanging greetings and carrying files or laptops. Peter followed Daniel closely, feeling both nervous and out of place. "Don't worry," Daniel said, sensing Peter's unease. "Everyone here started somewhere. Let me introduce you to a few people." They spent the morning touring the facility. Daniel introduced Peter to several department heads and explained that Peter would begin in a general maintenance role while learning about the company's operations. "It's not glamorous," Daniel said, "but it's an important job. And if you're interested in moving up, we can work toward that." "I'll do my best," Peter replied, his voice steady but filled with determination. For the next few weeks, Peter poured himself into his work. The job was demanding, fixing broken fixtures, setting up office spaces, and assisting with renovations, but it was also rewarding. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. The staff, initially hesitant about the newcomer, warmed to Peter quickly. His reliability and work ethic earned him respect, and his humility made him easy to approach. Daniel checked in regularly, often inviting Peter for coffee breaks or casual conversations. One evening, after a particularly long day, Daniel asked Peter to join him for dinner in the main house. They ate on the patio, overlooking the garden as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Peter," Daniel said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I can see you're settling in well. But I want to know, what's your dream? What do you want for your future?" Peter paused, surprised by the question. "My dream," he repeated, almost unsure how to answer. "I guess. I've always loved working with my hands, creating something from nothing. Carpentry was my passion. I'd love to get back to it one day, maybe even start my own business again." Daniel smiled. "That's a good dream. And from what I've seen, you have the skills to make it happen." Peter hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that, he admitted. It feels like a long way off. One step at a time, Daniel said. You've already come farther than you think. And when you're ready, I'll help you get there. Those words stayed with Peter as he continued working. He began saving what little he could from his salary, slowly building toward the possibility of reclaiming his craft. In his spare time, he started small carpentry projects, fixing furniture and crafting simple items for his coworkers. One day, Daniel approached Peter with a grin. I have a surprise for you, he said. Peter raised an eyebrow. A surprise? Yes, Daniel said. There's an old warehouse I own a few miles from here. It's been sitting empty, but it has plenty of space. I thought you might like to use it as a workshop. Peter froze, his mind racing. A workshop, he repeated, barely daring to believe it. Daniel nodded. It's yours, rent-free for the first year. You'll need a proper space if you want to get back into carpentry. What do you think? Tears welled in Peter's eyes as he struggled to find the right words. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You don't need to, Daniel replied warmly. Just keep working hard and follow that dream of yours. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Peter spent his evenings cleaning and setting up the workshop, transforming it into a space that felt like home. With Daniel's help, he purchased a few tools and materials to get started. Soon, the once empty warehouse was filled with the sound of saws and hammers, the scent of freshly cut wood filling the air. Daniel arranged an open house event to showcase Peter's work, inviting local businesses and community members to see the space. Peter was nervous, but the response was overwhelming. Guests admired his handcrafted furniture and placed orders on the spot. You've got something special here, one guest said, shaking Peter's hand. Your work has heart. It's clear you love what you do. By the end of the evening, Peter had more orders than he ever imagined possible. As he cleaned up the workshop, Daniel approached him, a proud smile on his face. I think this is just the beginning for you, Daniel said. Peter nodded, his heart full of gratitude. I never thought my life could change like this, he said. You've given me a second chance and I'll never forget it. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. You earned this, Peter. You took the opportunity and made the most of it. All I did was open the door. As Peter locked up for the night, he looked around at the workshop that had become a symbol of his rebirth. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Peter's days soon found a steady rhythm. During the mornings, he worked at Daniel's company, handling maintenance and small office improvements. In the afternoons and evenings, he poured his heart into the workshop, crafting tables, chairs, and other custom pieces for the growing list of clients who had attended the open house. Word spread quickly about Peter's skill, and soon he found himself struggling to keep up with demand. One Friday afternoon, Daniel visited the workshop to see Peter's progress. The space was alive with activity, saws whirring, the scent of varnish hanging in the air, and half-finished projects arranged neatly along the walls. You've built quite the operation here, Daniel said, his voice carrying a note of pride. Peter smiled as he wiped sawdust from his hands. It's been busy, but I'm not complaining. This is what I've always wanted to do. Daniel nodded. I can tell. And I think it's time to take this to the next level. Peter looked up. Curious. What do you mean? Daniel leaned against one of the workbenches. I've been speaking with a few contacts of mine. There's a business advisor I'd like you to meet. She can help you refine your plans and figure out how to grow this into something sustainable. If you need financial backing, I'd be happy to invest. Peter stared at him, speechless. You'd do that, he asked finally. Of course, Daniel replied. You've already proven that you have the talent and dedication. I believe in you, Peter. The meeting with the business advisor was a turning point. Peter arrived with his sketches, notes, and a long list of ideas he'd been carrying for years. The advisor, Laura, was a sharp-eyed woman with a calm demeanor. She listened intently as Peter explained his vision for a small carpentry business focused on handcrafted, sustainable pieces. "This is a great foundation," Laura said, reviewing his notes. "We'll work on a business plan, marketing strategy, and cost analysis, but I can already see your passion for this work. That's something you can't teach." Peter left the meeting feeling energized and more hopeful than ever. With Laura's guidance and Daniel's support, he began transforming his workshop into a full-fledged business. He hired 2 apprentices, young people looking for direction in their lives, and patiently taught them the craft he loved. Watching them learn and grow under his guidance brought Peter immense joy. One evening, as Peter was wrapping up for the day, Daniel stopped by with a surprise. "I thought you might like to see this," Daniel said, handing Peter a glossy flyer. Peter unfolded it carefully. It was an advertisement for a local artisan fair, featuring his workshop's name and a showcase of his work. "I arranged for you to have a booth," Daniel said. "It's a great opportunity to connect with more clients and get your name out there." Peter's hands trembled slightly as he looked at the flyer. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've already thanked me," Daniel replied with a smile. "This is your moment, Peter. Make the most of it." The artisan fair was a resounding success. Peter's booth was one of the busiest, with attendees admiring his pieces and placing orders on the spot. Local shop owners approached him about collaborations, and a few even expressed interest in carrying his furniture in their stores. As the fair wound down, Peter stood by his booth, watching the crowd with a sense of pride and gratitude that was almost overwhelming. Daniel appeared beside him, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Look at what you've built," Daniel said. "This is just the beginning." Peter nodded, his heart full. "I never thought I'd have a chance like this," he said. "You gave me more than an opportunity, you gave me my life back." Daniel shook his head. "All I did was believe in you, Peter. The rest was you." That night, as Peter returned to his workshop, he found himself reflecting on how far he had come. The streets that had once been his home now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of purpose and community. Months turned into a year, and Peter's business thrived beyond his wildest dreams. He expanded his workshop, hired more apprentices, and secured partnerships with local stores to showcase his furniture. His handcrafted pieces were celebrated for their quality and heart, and Peter found himself busier than he'd ever been. Despite his success, Peter never lost sight of where he'd come from or the turning point that had changed everything. He often thought back to the day he found Daniel's wallet and chose to return it. That single act of honesty had opened doors he never could have imagined. One evening, as Peter was locking up the workshop, he noticed a man sitting on the curb just outside the gates. The man's clothes were worn, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He had the same defeated look that Peter had seen in his own reflection not so long ago. Peter approached him cautiously. "Hey there," he said gently. "Are you okay?" The man looked up, startled. "Just trying to figure out my next move," he said. "Been out here for a while. Lost my job, my home. Pretty much everything." Peter felt a pang of recognition. "What's your name?" he asked. "Joe," the man replied. "Well, Joe, you look like you could use a warm meal and a place to rest," Peter said. He extended a hand. "Come inside. Let's talk." Joe hesitated, then nodded, his eyes filling with gratitude. Peter led him to the guest house, now repurposed as a temporary shelter for people in need, and helped him settle in. Over a warm dinner, Peter shared his story, the wallet, the cafe, and how one moment of compassion had set him on a path to rebuilding his life. Joe listened intently, his expression a mix of disbelief and hope. "And now you're running your own business?" he asked. Peter smiled. "I am. But more than that, I'm trying to pay forward the kindness that was shown to me. Everyone deserves a second chance." The next morning, Peter introduced Joe to Daniel, who had come by the workshop to check on a new project. Together, they discussed ways to help Joe get back on his feet, just as Daniel had once done for Peter. As Peter watched Joe take his first steps toward rebuilding his life, he felt a deep sense of purpose. Helping others, he realized, was as fulfilling as crafting furniture or running a business. It was a way to honor the kindness that had changed his own life. Months later, as Peter stood in his bustling workshop surrounded by his team, he reflected on how far he'd come. The journey had been full of challenges, but each step had brought him closer to the man he was meant to be. And now he had the opportunity to be the light for others, just as Daniel had been for him. That evening, Peter and Daniel sat on the porch of the workshop, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You've come a long way," Daniel said, his voice warm. "I couldn't have done it without you," Peter replied. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." Daniel shook his head. "You're the one who made the most of it. And now you're doing the same for others. That's what it's all about." Peter nodded, his heart full of gratitude and pride. As the stars began to twinkle above, he realized that his story wasn't just about finding redemption, it was about creating it for others. And so, under the endless expanse of the night sky, Peter made a silent promise to keep building not just furniture, but hope, opportunity, and second chances for all who crossed his path.